For us has a very important role, and we're considering to have the log watch at one point in time and really unifying them. We have two methods for log file monitoring right now. That's the simple log watch, and that is happening automatically, but there are some disadvantages, for example, that you can't assign notifications individually and also other things that the events console can do, but the events console is a little bit more complex, and that's why we have both right now, but it's possible that in the future we're going to try to do the default log file monitoring with the console. Okay, situation 123, that's the following. The GUI, you can see events, that's always accessing the local event console. So that works pretty well, but not if the event console is running on a different computer. So for distributed monitoring, you're forced to really have the event console on the master server. And of course, that also means that you can only have one, so that limits you. Otherwise, you don't have the access to the GUI. And of course, that does not scale well, and it's also possible that you're going to have problems with the network. So you can say, okay, from this location, I cannot send any messages to the master server. It's just not working because, for example, it's in a different network segment or whatever. And in addition to that, another problem is that the event console does not have information about hosts. So what does it need the information for? Well, it really doesn't need it, but it's very helpful if it does have it, because then if there are any alerts or alarms, anything like that, and also when it comes to visibility, it can respond properly. So it can know if it's downtime or not. So because of that, we really reworked on that. It was quite a lot of work, but we now extended the event console in a way and the microcore that the access and also the Nagios core, that the access on the event console now works via live status. And because of that, we have the following. So now we don't access it locally anymore. We can just go the proper way. So now you can have one event console per location, and you then have the advantage that it scales better. And you do not have to have any events via warning paths or anything like that. So you can just do it the same way the host is monitoring it, and then also it has access to the host. So simple things like alias, for example, or the correct host name. So if you have a Paytrip, for example, then you only know the IP address of the sender. And since we now have the local monitoring as an access, the event console can now just gather the remaining data. That wasn't possible in the past because the event console was running on a very different system and it can't access it. Okay, there are some advantages when it comes to the visibility in status GUI. So it does it through the event console now and not later on through the GUI itself. And also when it comes to alarms and alerts, if you have the event console and you then send an alarm to CheckMK directly, that makes a lot of sense. Then I now have nice things like correct host name and alias, primary IP address. I have access to the host tags and also the information whether or not a host is in downtime. So you also get the alarm of the event console that considers the scheduled downtimes and then does not send an alarm or a warning. So again, this is the unification of status-based and event-based monitoring. And well, what do you have to do now if you want to switch? So of course it's a lot of work if you have a setup with a central event console. And the new best practice is that you have a host and you always send the events to the place where it's monitored. That's the only way the downtimes are going to work. So that means if you wanted to switch, then in each instance you would have to have an event console. And of course, what's a lot of work as well is that you have the syslog destinations and trap destinations. You would have to switch them as well so that they go to the right monitoring server. So the old setup is still possible. It still works. So you're not forced to switch, but it's the new best practice because then certain things are just going to work that didn't work before. Okay, then a smaller thing. So we also have a step towards the integration of this monitoring step. So what we have done is that we now have events and they can be shown in the tactical overview as well. So an event is potentially a problem that I can look at and that can be acknowledged or not. And because of that, there's a third line now. And with that, I have one central view when it comes to all the different monitoring steps. Okay, and then also an improvement when it comes to the performance snap-in. So just like all IT components, the event console also has the topic performance in it, so you can always reach a limit. And what's new about the snap-in is that we now have a new metric. So that's visible right here, and that's the load. So you can see processing load 100%, and the event console measures the percentage of real-time they're using to really process it and how much time do they spend just waiting for the next one. So it's very simple. So if there are just waiting periods over and over again, that means you have capacities. So if it's at 100%, it means, okay, it's really, really working very hard. It really can't keep up with all the events that it has to work on. And since there is a limit in the network, so it means that events are going to get lots. And that's the same for every switch port. That's the same problem. So if you get more that you can work in, of course, then things might get lost. And syslog, you cannot, if they come in, they come in. So you just have to catch them. You only have one chance. If you don't do that, they're going to get lost. And that is really one of the disadvantages of event-based monitoring. But with this new metric, I can really see very easily what it looks like. All the other things are sort of low-level values. Rule hits, for example, the rule hit ratio was also present in the past. How efficient is everything? But with the load, this is sort of the summary of what it really looks like right now in terms of load capacity. And then also with the event console, you can't see it in the screenshot yet, but then you can also just look at individual things and click on it and get more information. Okay, another thing that changed, we can now receive SNMP-v3 traps, so at least one person needs it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. I'm not sure if that person is here. Who thinks this is a big topic? Okay. So it was worth doing it. So when it comes to SNMP-v3, of course, you want to use the encryption authentication. So of course, there's no encryption that's guaranteed by itself, but that's the reason why you're doing it, really. And that is why you need these settings right here. and of course also with the new margins of error, because they might not get there because you configured something not properly, and maybe also this device might only send one trap once a year and then you're not getting it because there was a mistake made somewhere here. And then you have to think about, okay, do you really need it encrypted or not at this point in time? Another thing that's really nice is the master control. There is this option notifications. And the user really assumed that if they turn it off, that they're not going to get any notifications anymore. For the event console, that wasn't the case so far. So the notifications from the event console ignored this switch because it was in the monitoring core and not in the event console. But now this switch does work. However, it's still under the, well, no, actually it does work. Okay, you always have to consider though that this is per site. So of course you have to switch it to that site where your event console is running. So wherever the events go to, that's where you need the notification. Okay, then we also worked on the event simulator. In this case, we added a couple of different things. So we have the service level here as well now. And also for the event console, you can also simulate now. So let's assume that the event came to this side, and then of course you test the rule evaluation. You can just check if it works or not. So in this, the event rules then also apply to all the different sites. Okay, we also did some things that are more convenient when it comes to archiving events. So just a simple thing, but we really have an icon now where we can say, okay, this event, well, in the past it was delete, and archiving and deleting is almost the same thing. So it is deleted from the open events, but it's ending up with archives, because then it says, okay, it's deleted or archived. And that is just easier now. That's work 4166. That's doing almost the same thing. So you can now say, okay, let's archive all events from one specific host. So you just go to the details of one host, and then you say, okay, let's archive everything. Maybe it didn't work properly, and maybe you got 50 or 100 different notifications that you're not interested in, that you can just get rid of it this way. Okay, and then we have another thing that we changed. That's a little bit more complex. So now we have a new option, and that's about rules where you're calculating. So the event console has a lot of possibilities in terms of really working with the amount of events. So you can say, for example, okay, if there are more than 30 events per hour coming in, I want to only see it then. And now what you can do is, well, usually it would stop counting then, and it would not generate any new events. So let's say, okay, I'm going to have a rule. If there are more than 10 per minute, for example, then I want to open an event. And the event is now open. And now you get 5,000 other sign-in requests. And then it's not going to be 10 new events, but it's just going to be the number that's increasing, because the event console needs to be free from spam, right? So with this option, I can say, okay, after 30 minutes, definitely open a new event if it's still there or if it's happening again. And that's just, yeah, a little thing that we changed, and is just sort of fine-tuning the situation. And those of you who are working with events, you always need to consider that something might go wrong with the source, so that there might be too many events coming in, and you just have to be prepared for that, so that you just don't close up your monitoring. And that is also the reason for this work, the overflow protection. And the event console is forced to really save everything that is coming in and process everything that's coming in. So if the rule says each event of this certain type needs to be taken in, then that's what the console does. And if all of a sudden, for example, 50,000 notification comes in because there's a misconfiguration somewhere, then, well, there are going to be performance problems at one point. And what you don't want to do is make sure that the event console is then blind to all different events. What we want to achieve is that we if we have a situation that's not normal like that, if a host is going crazy or something like that, or if in the whole network all the switches say something strange every second, something happened, 1,000 devices tell you the same notification over and over again, and the event console has the possibility to really work on a lot of notifications per second, but it can only save a certain amount. So what we try to do is really get a handle on the situation and do it automatically. So that means we are trying to really be ready for these huge amounts of notifications by really limiting that number. And this is really important. So individual limits per host, per rule, and total. So if you limit them in total, then you can make sure that you can still use the event console, but then you're not going to process any events at all anymore. And so you can still see what happened up to that point, but then you're blind and monitoring really. And that is really the last resort. So the first thing you would try to do is do per host. So if a host is sending you 1,000 events, then you're just going to say, okay, we're going to cut off that host. So that's enough with you. And now let's give everybody else a try. So there is a limit now, and you can then also get a notification so from the person that is in charge of that host, and we do have that connection. We can say, okay, what's going on? I have 1,000 times the same notification. I'm going to have to think of something. Or the event console, for example, you might fine tune the rules, so you might only calculate and not process each event individually. And you can do the same thing per rule. So that means if you have this storm of messages, then it's not unlikely that they are all by the same rule. So one SMP trap, for example, that is then just worked on by one rule. That rule might close up, and then all the other notifications are still coming in, and you can still process them properly. So if all of that doesn't work, then we still have a total limit, but that's very unlikely because you have so many notifications, then they're either from one rule or one host. So they're of the same type. Okay, so what can I do? If there is an overflow, for example, so there are no new events taken in, that's the most important thing from that type, of course, of that type or from that host. And then we have one last event that's generated, and then I can then have a notification rule for that, an alarm rule for that, so I can see what happened. And if this affects a host, then of course I can really notify the host contact. So if it's just a rule, then of course I don't have a contact person. And in that case, I would then notify the admins, and you have the user profile. There's this little check right there, and you can set that, and you can really determine that you want to get notifications like that. Okay, another thing that improved as well is also the event and contact collaboration, really. So that's due to the fact that we now have access to the local event console, but there are still events that are coming from events that are not known in monitoring. That's very important as well. And it's important that these events are processed still. So we might not have contact information, and usually you can find contact information. So if you say, okay, if this rule and an event is coming in, then this person is responsible, or this is the contact person. And now you can also say if both is the case. So in the rule, there's a contact person, and there's one an event. In we know the host, and then you can determine what's supposed to happen. And if you send a notification from the event console and the host is not known, then you still have the same problem again. And if nothing's in the rule and nothing's in the host, then the fallback contacts are going to be notified. Those are the ones that I just mentioned. So there's a user profile, and you have the possibility to have somebody in there as a fallback contact, and you can check that, and that's the one that's responsible for it then. And those are the most important works that I wanted to show. And I have 2 more pages of additional little things right here, and you have about 2 minutes to ask questions.
Nicht, dass ich wieder überziehe wie gestern.
I have a question about the fallback contact. Isn't that some sort of spam for administrators? Because somebody shoots events onto my monitoring, and then the poor guy receives information. No, there's no automatic alarming This is about an overflow event situation, or if you have something in the rule that I do want to send an alert to that person. The event console doesn't alert anybody. It just opens an event. Yeah, but the fallback contact, that is an optional thing, right? Yes, it's optional. But what we're trying is, I mean, people do complain if monitoring creates an alarm that nobody needs, everybody's unhappy. But if monitoring misses an alert, then everybody's really unhappy. So that's why we do everything that somebody gets the alert somehow. I mean, this is the paradigm check in Check.mk. This is the worst possible incident that there was a problem and nobody gets alerted. The other thing is about tuning, getting rid of unnecessary spam, but otherwise the monitoring wouldn't work at all. Other questions? You didn't say it explicitly, but I kinda read it between the lines. If I have distributed consoles on different slave sides, then also on the master side there will be a view on which I can see all the events? Yes, indeed. It's pretty much like live status. You can see it all, just like you wanted to have it. Thank you. Hello, one question about overflow options. Are there default values or do you have to tune the rule first and activate it? Is overflow activated per default? Yes, yes it is. The protection is on. So you are protected from the start. Hello, over here. You said the event console now knows that there's a host on maintenance on downtime, which is great. We are using the logwatch to send logs to the event console. Wouldn't it be nice if the event console would know if the log service is in downtime? Because we have the case that the logwatch is in downtime, or I'm setting it to downtime, and then logs come up, then it will be forwarded to the event console, and then alarms are being generated. Interesting point. The event console is separate from the logs and doesn't know that they come. So you just want the logwatch service and take it down? Yes, I have a colleague, they do downtime and they just take a few services down, like for example the log files, and there may be critical logs coming up during maintenance, and then they're being spooled to the event console, and then event console turns them into notifications. That's interesting. The only thing I can think of now would be to create an alarm rule saying out of the event console, things that come from there, I want to treat them separately. So you create a rule, no event console alarms for that host, and turn the rules on and off. Yeah, but I cannot have everybody who creates a downtime let them all create rules. I can't do that. Yeah, unfortunately, there is no clean solution. Okay, so you just throw a few coins in, and then yes, then we will certainly think of a solution. What matters to us is to really see what the real problem is in there, and then of course together we can try and find a perfect solution for you. Hi Matthias, have you thought about that from the event console? You may implement the alerts coming from the console, because whoever works on a console might set an acknowledgement on the event console management, and then that would have to be mirrored to the monitoring. Did you ever think about that? Yes, events are being acknowledged, but these are things that do not. I'm not sure I understood the question. Could you repeat it? So you make alarms from the monitoring to the event console. Maybe somebody does it. Oh, you mean the other way around. So you say no matter where you set the acknowledgement in the event console or in monitoring, that is being synchronized. So you're using the event console as an alarm system, as our central place for the IT state or alarms. I needed some kind of synchronizing here. Yeah, currently we don't offer anything in that direction. The other way around, the event console, having the status of the event console in the status-based monitoring, that is an option to have it on the total view. That works more smoothly. The way you described, I'm not sure whether it's possible. It may have to be scripted. I'm sure you did. So I would like to present the floor to my colleague, the next speaker, who will tell you about. So let's begin. I'm going to talk about the news in the notification module. So everything that is new with alarms, which isn't really that much, but there's one or two interesting ones, which are the notification spooler. A few things have changed here. Starting with version 1.40, the notification spooler is always on, and it cannot be turned off. And in addition, you can do asynchronous alarms through emails or notifications. And it does have a few charming advantages. So as soon as the notification daemon is running, all the alarms are being spooled to files. There can be no backlog, no jamming. And if the core of the notification stops for any reason, the alarms will be processed afterward. So no email, no alarm gets lost. In work A330, I have a little paper here with the details. The notify daemons can now also show the results back to the core, whether an alarm was being correctly sent. And if there was an error, there's a little info down here. And in here it says 2 failed notifications. And if you click on it, you get this screen. You have the 2 notifications that weren't sent because I hadn't set up a send mail. And on a file level, it looks like this. There are 2 spool files. And they are in the var checkmk notify spools directory. And you could also add an alarm to this. Then talking about the mail body, 2 things changed here, or basically they were added. 2 nice things. You can also add notes, like a link to the internal wiki or something, or perhaps additional information. And you can also add an extra HTML section between body and table. Maybe add the user or email recipient and put some in. You can put some like big colorful letters in there, warning, please look out or something, or provide extra information. It all comes in through the notification tool. You can see it here. The custom host nodes. You can just check that, and you can also insert the HTML section. Then bulk notifications, we added event console contacts. They can also receive bulk notifications to prevent a flood of emails from the event console. So talking about the next one, the font messed up a little here. We added a few conditions for service group matching, which is exclude service groups. It's a dual list choice selection box and also match and exclude through regex. It looks like this in the program. The match service group was existing before, but the exclude service group was added here with a selection box and underneath the two other new ones, so match and exclude. Then match of event console rules. You can now set up a rule with the alarms or the alerts to react to several event console rules simultaneously. So if rule 1 and 2 or 3, then please generate an alert. And that's it for the major works. Two new Roman variables. Work 3886. If a notification does not match any rule, they are sent to fallback contacts. Matthias mentioned that before. Then the mail notification script can now also send emails directly to the SMTP server. This could be activated in the global settings directly or with each email rule separately, if you want to contact specific email servers, which of course is possible. Then here's 4286. That's also interesting. The SMTP MIBs can be now packed into MKP packages. They can be baked, so to speak. Packed, sorry. And can be copied to a host. That's it from my side. If there are any questions. Yeah, there's a few. With the switch to the new graphs, the notification emails did get a lot bigger. Looking at the megabytes, I'm not sure why, but it's notable. Are there any workarounds to go back to like reasonable sizes? I'm not sure. Maybe anybody knows? Let's try. Perhaps the images are being generated in a different way for the notifications. The libraries that are behind it, they do possess some sort of compressing function, and I think there's some tuning in there, like tuning opportunity. Depends on what size or what dimension you have the images. Maybe that could be a setting option, so to get smaller emails. An alternative would be, if you don't really need it, you could also take the notification script and activate the images separately, so you only get the text content. In the field notifications in the technical overview, are these warn notifications or alerts or both? If they are warn notifications between MK Notify these, or do they also go out by email? What we've shown here was the final stage, what we've created. The fact that we can see that a notification goes wrong, that's why we have a synchronous SMTP. Why not the Linux mail daemon that is present anyway? Well, alarming gives it to the daemon, and if there's a mistake, you can look that up in a log file if you want. But with a synchronous SMTP, we get the direct response from the target server, from the smart host, in the positive and the negative case. And then we can use that as feedback, and then the notification can go wrong, and it's been shown. So this mistake means your external mail server says, I don't know the user or whatever the mistake may be, and thereby you can document what's happening. And in a positive case, you can see it in the log file. Not in this example, but the reply from the mail server, including the ID that has been given out. So you can say to monitoring, this mail went out with this ID, or it didn't. No. It doesn't make sense to have an alarm here because alarming doesn't work here. We do alerts by standard as a ticket system, and it would be nice to have a mail, maybe have a rule for that if things go wrong. Yes, a check plugin could be built for that. It's a file that's saving this. It could also be acknowledged, but there's no out-of-the-box solution. A follow-up question to this: we do alerts for a ticket system. Is there a way to trigger that? Because it goes into a ticketing system, the notification is like a return value that could be shown into the notifications. Well, you have to, if you write a notification script, it has to have an exit code is 0 and it has to have a text. It's pretty much like a check plugin. Another question about the notes that you get on the notifications. Does that also work with parameters? For example, could I have server name in there? Yes, that's possible. Through the host name. Okay, I get it. I have a question over here. If you now let it all run through the notification spooler, is there an option to have a full spooler and delete it? Like smart host not reachable, 1 million emails wait for delivery, and I say, okay, don't do it. If your smart host is not accessible, then the alerts will not be repeated. If you have synchronous SMTP, you get some kind of failed notification. I only get the notification delivery failed, and then it's being discarded. In the notification script, yes, and it doesn't try n times to send the message again, right? No, these messages are not interesting 5 hours later, so we're not trying to keep sending it till the end of time. A notification script can also show you a temporary error, and then in that case it would be repeated. But if the server just said, I don't know, the user, there's one try and that's it. Otherwise, of course, you can delete the spool file through the console. Yeah, if there's a million things going wrong, you just delete the files. But if the other host is down, of course, it would be a temporary mistake. So it will try again, right? You're talking about 500 errors, right? Is the script this intelligent? I would have to look at the script. I'm not sure. There is a script for synchronous SMTP alerts, and there you can look into the details. That's you made that, right? Yes. It doesn't use an SMTP daemon. It just opened port 25, of course, with a Python lib. You can look at files, perhaps tune them if you want to.
Guten Morgen zusammen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the BI. We already had a very interesting speech yesterday about an application case of BI, and I would now like to tell you a little bit about what's new. So, of course, there are a couple of things that are already there for 128, as, for example, the fact that we can now reorganize rule into packs, and that has an advantage, being that if you're part of a department, for example, that only does specific things, for example, application management or something like that, and we have a rule set of about 100 different rules, then of course I'll probably only be interested in a couple of them. And in order to not have to really click through 50,000 rules or really pick out what I need, we now have organized them in packs. And of course, you can also put contacts and also rights on those packs. So as the application manager, you have the contact group application management, for example. So you're the only one that can access this pack. And in addition to that, nobody else really sees those rules. You don't get any other rules, so that's really good. And of course, you can also share those rules between packs. So that means if you're in the default pack, for example, and that's available on each site, and if you have an aggregation there, then you can also access packs from these applications and use them. And this is what it's going to look like. So you can see, well, I'm going to try to show you right here. Up here, what you see is the access to the rules. That's the pack right here. And you can see we have 13 rules in here. And those are the characteristics right here of the pack, the properties. You can also add contact groups right here, or you can also make it public so that everybody can access it. And if you're then in the rule itself, you can then access the rule right here. And if, for example, you don't have the default pack public, but it's only accessible to a certain group that I'm not part of, then I only see this new rule right here, my rule, and I can then get the result quickly. So this has been available since 1.2.8 already. That's why I'm just going to go through this very briefly. And 2 or 3 other new works right here. They've also been implemented for quite a while, and that are these 3 that you see right here. So first of all, we're now in a position where we can also copy and deactivate rules if you want to, and we can change the ID of the rule, so we can rename it. For example, if there are new name conventions and things like that, you can just change it now. You can correct it later on. And in addition to that, another very nice feature is that we can now also have host alias in rules. So I have a screenshot of that as well, and you can see how we do that. So we have the same button right here. You can copy the rule if we want to create similar rules, and you can deactivate it as well. And in addition to that, instead of looking for the host name, you can also filter by host alias, so that if your host alias is Hugo, for example, then you can not have the host name up here in the aggregation, but the host alias instead. So maybe the last work that I would like to show you today before we move on to a very interesting topic, and well, another interesting topic, let me say that, is the aggregation of downtimes. I'm not sure who knows the aggregation of downtimes already. So not many. Okay, so I'm just going to explain it very briefly. And we're going to get back to the previous slide in just a second. So far, if you aggregate a downtime, we are pretending as if all services were okay, and only the services that are in a downtime right now, those are the one that get the downtime symbol. So of course now we're calculating the whole aggregation, and we're just going to see what happens. And if the status of the service in downtime is going up here, maybe just to a different level, then this level is then also going to downtime as well. And it's then visible that the aggregation itself is also in downtime. If that is not the case, and we can see that right here, then nothing happens. So in this case, what we see is the aggregation is calculated. The downtime would not go to the next level. And in this case, the next level would not go into downtime either. The advantage being that if you look up here, you would see, okay, my host today is in an okay state. Well, in this case, it's not okay, but it doesn't have anything to do with downtime. And if we now also put the second service in a downtime as well, then of course it would go through here, because I defined that if there are 2 services that change their status, then please do pass that up top. So you see very nicely here, the downtime is being passed on, but the status is still calculated correctly. So even if I only set 1 downtime right here, I still have 2 services on warn, and it's passed on to the top as you are used to. And so far that was only possible for CRIT. Oh, we have the first question already. Okay, so we are using the BTATs for the notification as well. And we always have the problem that people go there, acknowledges or put a service in downtime because something happened. And our problem is that if something is critical, then we still have critical up there. So because of that, we then have the problem with the notification, because I don't want, well, the whole aggregation is notified or escalated really, and in our case it's a problem because the status doesn't change or we just don't realize it. Okay, so if I understand you correctly, then you have the problem up here, right? That the aggregation itself is on warn or crit itself, right? Yes, correct. And sometimes I have not tried the 1.4 version. It would be interesting to check that, but I'm not even sure who I discussed that with before, but I have talked about it. And there are some specific effects if, like I said, the downtimes are going up, but it's still notified. Maybe Matthias can give us an answer? Well, in order for you to really have the downtime on the service as well, you need the new BI check, because then the downtime of the BI aggregate can be taken on, and the old local check cannot do that, because a check result cannot say I'm downtime, right? But the new thing can do that. So the BI downtime that is calculated right here is then mapped on the server. So maybe it's just about downtime in general. It takes about 30 minutes to understand the concept that's behind it. So I can just define it in a sentence, but maybe you can think about it later, what it really means. I'm just going to try to do that because that's discussed very often. A BI aggregate is in downtime if you assume that everything that is in downtime actually is critical and everything else would be okay. And then you calculate the whole thing, and then if it's critical on top, then it is a downtime. So say it differently, let's assume that everything where you have maintenance is really broken, everything else does work. And if then the maintenance still does work, because then it says, okay, it's not a problem because they're redundant components, and that means, okay, it really doesn't need a downtime. So the application itself doesn't need a downtime, but if it doesn't work anymore, then you do see the downtime symbol up there. So the downtime symbol tells you, okay, warning, it might be green right now, but somebody's working on that. It could turn red at any point in time because there's maintenance being done. So that's the moon, right? It doesn't tell you, okay, it's broken. It just says, okay, it's possible that it could be critical at any point in time. And this is what you see in the BI right here. So it takes a while to understand this, and you can also tune this with many different options. No problem. Okay, you really have to think this through to really understand what is actually happening. But we don't have enough time for that right now. But the actual work is that we now so far have used as crit, so we are calculating it as crit, and right now we can also do that with warn. So that means in the aggregation itself you have that check and you say, okay, the aggregation is now calculated as a warn, and if it's then going to the next level, then the downtime is being set. The principle is the same, but the assumed state is different. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the performance works. And I think they're interesting to many of you. So first of all, we have two older works. First of all, we have the precompile aggregations on demand. That's a function from the global settings. And that is now a default. It's switched on. And the aggregations have been calculated completely, even if there was just one request. So now we also have generally improved performance over the past year and a half, and then also for single aggregation specifically, because in the past it was the case that we had one aggregation for one host, and that was only for that host as well, and the BI then went ahead and really calculated all of them and then only gave you the result for one. And of course, in terms of performance, that's not a very good solution, so we did resolve that problem. So if you now only want to get the information from one host, the BI, then that's the only one that's being calculated. And all of these things can be seen here as well. I cut a little bit so it's bigger for you. So what we have right here is optimization for the single host aggregations, and then we also have the aggregation of downtimes. And you can then also switch them to one, and then also the ones that you are used to already, all the options that you're familiar with. Okay, now we're going to talk about a bigger change right here, and that really affects big parts of the code and also the speed of BI aggregation when it comes to individual big and also many small options. So it's just drastically improved. It's not all the way finished. The works 4469, I think, is only a week or two old, and there's still more to come. And two things are already ready, so I can already show you. So two things. So far, for each Apache process, we had our own cache. So that means that we had a user A wants to look at BI1, and then he ends up with Apache, and Apache calculates the BI and saves it in the cache, and then in the end you see this view. That's what is shown. And then user A then wants to look at BI2. This is the Apache ends up with, and of course this Apache calculates this BI, and then this is what you see again. So user B also wants to look at it, but he doesn't end up with this Apache, but this one instead. And it calculates the BI completely and then shows it again. So you can imagine if you have a certain number of Apache processes right now, we are always calculating the same BI again and again and again. And of course, this is very, very intense. It's not very nice. And that's why we really thought about that specifically. Andreas Böse really thought about that, and he remodeled it. So it's now one cache. And this is how it would work. So Apache, just random Apache looks up, okay, is there a cache for a specific BI? If not, then he's going to calculate everything all at once. So it does calculate it, and then it distributes it to all the different processors, cores, and then once it's done, it's going to put it there, and then you can share it with all other Apache processes. That's very nice, because then if user 2, for example, says, okay, I want to look at BI2, then Apache process looks it up and sees right away, okay, there's information available already, I can fill it in and then move on. So the speed is really much, much, much faster. And I have two examples right here. So hopefully you can read it in the back as well. Otherwise, I'm gonna just say it out loud so you can see it as well. So the first example are large aggregations, not many, but large ones. So we have a computation time of about 70 seconds, and which has a repercussion when we have 200 Apaches and 8 cores. We need about 30 minutes to calculate it. So 30 minutes to just calculate it once. So if there's a change, then we have to start all over again, right? But they're just extreme examples you're showing. Yes, yes, absolutely. They're extreme examples, no question about that. So the second one is the other way around. We have a lot of different BIs, and the calculation is done very quickly. And we have 20 seconds right here, and the same setup, 200 Apaches, 8 cores. We have a calculation time of 8 minutes. And I do understand for most of you, this is probably not applicable right now. You probably either have a BI 40 or 70 seconds to be calculated, and you probably also don't have 100 BIs. But the access time is something that could have some impacts, especially if you use DBI as an active check, then it's in the sidebar and so on, and then very quickly you have a lot of different processes of Apache going on that needs to calculate it. So I don't want you to get the impression that this is usually always very, very slow. That's not the case, because if you're using DBI properly, then it's usually so fast you don't even notice it. But there are some people that do crazy things with it, and then all of a sudden they have thousands of different aggregates or thousands of nodes or whatever, and then there can be performance problems. Okay, so if there are a lot or very big aggregates. That wasn't ideal so far, so we did change that, and we now have a calculation time of 40 seconds. So in this example, I assume the biggest aggregation, right, is 40 seconds, so 1 out of the 3. And this is also scalable with as many processes as you want. And that also means that whether you have 20, 200, or 2,000 Apache processes, the duration is going to be 40 seconds. Maybe we should also add that this only has to happen once. This calculation has to happen once if the aggregation is changing or the core is starting. Then it remembers it, and then it doesn't have to do it again. So currently, as soon as the core is started, it's recalculated, so with every change. And also changes that don't affect the BI. So it's really every change of the core. And then the second example again, what we see here, we go from 8 minutes to 2.5 seconds. So I think in most cases, this is probably not going to have a big impact on you, but especially if you want to have several accesses, then it is going to be relevant. And then what's very, very new, the new work 4469, and that is the distributed monitoring. So I have an extreme example here again on purpose, just so you can really see obviously what we've changed right here and how well it is working now. So we have a setup with Nsites. We have 600 aggregations and 100 milliseconds latency. And what we did before, for each aggregation, we did one query. So every time one query, so for a lot of aggregations that can of course be a lot of work. And in this case, it could be up to 60 seconds just to get the data. So even if the aggregations can be calculated very, very quickly, it took quite a while to get the data. And that is something that is definitely optimized now. So we look at before, okay, what do we need? We evaluate the needed data for all aggregations, and then we are getting all the data from one query, and then we have a small overhead of 2 seconds for this example to really parse all the data again for the individual aggregations, and then we are computing it again and again. In this case, it would be a performance win of 58 seconds. So I think that's pretty good. And now we're ready for questions. Hi. So did you ever consider also notify service groups? Because then you might have the number of reduced as well. So if you have monitoring of operating systems, for example, you could also use the result of the group as a BI aggregation, and you wouldn't have to calculate so many different elements. Would that be an option as well to improve that? Well, as of right now, we calculate all BIs always. So regardless of how many we have, whether we have a service group, we would still calculate all BIs that we have when you restart the core. Well, just to understand it, all this calculating really is in the phase where your BI rules and the trees are created. So one BI could then create 100 trees, for example. The status of the tree can be calculated very quickly. That already happens. But we're talking about the phase right now that calculates what kind of BIs do we have and how are they set up. So that's what we're talking about right now. That's what takes a while, because that's when you have to calculate all the rules. That's also the reason why it's now happening so quickly, because of that change. So the calculation is really what takes so much time. So once we are right here, so if we are accessing an existing cache, that happens very, very quickly. And the actual thing that takes some time is really the calculation time. So how is the tree set up? And yeah. Okay, I have another question about the BI packs. We have a lot of different rules, and if within one rule I want to call another rule, then I have a very, very long list. And I wonder when it comes to the text, or how are they sorted so that I find them quicker? Because in our case, even if I separate them in packs, because we have the rights to all different packs, it's not going to be a shorter list for us. And so it's interesting to be able to search for it by matching, for example, or to just say, okay, it's put in order by packs, or I can just choose the ones that are in this specific area. Okay, I think right now, at this point in time where you want to connect rules, I think it's still going to be one long list. But maybe we could just have two levels, so maybe you can choose the pack first and then the rule. Would that be helpful? Maybe we could do that. That shouldn't be too difficult. So maybe a dual drop down. First one and then the other. Double drop down, something like that. That should be pretty easy to do. Any other questions? Oh, there's another question. We have one last question, I think. Hi, so I have a question about the view, how you can view a BI. Is it possible to have a separator? So I have a view where I have a dozen BIs in there, and I now want to separate it into core service and maybe application service. So just a visual separator, is that possible? Or do I have to then separate them in individual views? No, you have to separate it in individual views. So in views, you always have the possibility to group by things, right? And BIs also have a group, so possibly, maybe you could group it by BI group, and then you would have headlines. We should have to try that. That could be possible. Okay, and I have another question. So is it possible to have the availability of an aggregation directly in that view as well? So I can see it right there, so that you, let's say you have the aggregation and you would like a little button on the right-hand side that says availability in percentage. No, that's not possible right now. Would that be difficult to do? Well, as of right now, it would be, but after the reconstruction we are planning on, it could be a little bit easier. Okay, and then I have a last question. Yeah, I have a big BI environment. That's why I have a lot of questions. So we have the views in a dashboard, and we have the problem that we can scale the icons. So we have 10 icons next to each other, for example, and we have a pretty big display. And still, the icons still are the same size, regardless of the size of the display. Is that something that could be more responsive, maybe depending on the display size, it could be scalable? That's not a specific BI question, but I'm sure that could be done. The dashboard itself can do that. And yeah, we are going to look into that. Maybe your partner could let us know as well. Okay, thank you.